Hello there, and welcome to Weather Classroom on YouTube. I'm Thomas Patrick, a meteorologist with KREM 2 News in Spokane, Washington. And since the last time we did one of these weather classrooms just last week, well, it's been pretty crazy, but not just here in the Pacific Northwest where I'm located, but in all parts of the country. In fact, just a couple days ago, it was 50 degrees, but not before we had snow and grapple and wind, and then it was sunny later in the day. Just a wild mix of weather just the other days. And that's not just it. Got my friends back home in Wisconsin and Indiana were telling me it was 80 degrees on that very same day. So pretty crazy weather. Hopefully not too crazy on this Friday or for this upcoming weekend. But anyways, our topic today in Weather Classroom is on atmospheric optics. What is that? Well, it's the category of meteorology that has to do with rainbows and other things of the like. And in this case, I have some pictures to share with you. And first of all, I have a picture that I took myself. This was from this past Sunday in Spokane, Washington. In fact, that's pretty much right outside the apartment that I live in anyway. So that rainbow that's around the sun is called a sun halo, and that is part of atmospheric optics. It's not exactly a rainbow, but it's kind of created in the same way there. And essentially what you're having is a lot of cirrus clouds in the sky, acting as prisms to help to refract the sun's light to give us that rainbow feature. So instead of a rainbow where the sun is behind you, there's rain falling overhead and it's projecting the rainbow colors on the opposite side of the sun. This time it's pretty much you're looking through the prism that is the cirrus clouds in between you and the sun in the atmosphere, and that's what's creating this sun halo. And that's also the same reason why we get sun dogs and other things of the sort. And that's why I wanted to go over atmospheric optics to get the of the sort kind of topic for today. So that's pretty much it. You just have that high layer of cirrus clouds overhead, a lot of it, usually a thick overcast layer that obscures the sun somewhat, but of course the sun is still shining clear through those very thin and wispy clouds. What's happening is not the clouds themselves, but the individual ice crystals in the atmosphere act as a prism. And as the sun shines through the ice crystals, well, the light bends and it refracts and sometimes reflects, and we can get all these different types of optics to work with. The most common being the sun halo and the sun dogs. It also works with the moon's light as well. At times at night, we can even get light pillars. So all that all falls under this category of atmospheric optics. I will say in this particular picture, I cheated a little bit. I actually took the raw image and I increased the saturation so I could get the rainbow color to pop out a little bit more on this particular image. Also make the sky look more blue, but it really wasn't a very blue, shiny day. Let me show you some non-filter pictures I got from some of my viewers here in Spokane, Washington. That was a bit more of actually what it looked like in the sky. Very gray, this overcast layer of cirrus clouds, but the sun was shining clear through it because those cirrus clouds are so thin. But obviously there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of ice crystals and water droplets in the atmosphere that are helping to create that ring that we call a halo. And this is also pretty much the way we get sundogs as well, as the sun shining directly through the clouds. Now, I mentioned sun halos and sundogs, and those aren't the only other types of atmospheric optics. There's a whole lot that we can go into, and the reason we can get all these different shades of light and rainbow and light concentration is just simply the sun shining through ice crystals that are acting as prisms, and the different shape and the size and the rotation of these ice crystals can create all these different types of light features, like the sun halos, the 22-degree sun halo as it's known specifically, but there's also a 46-degree sun halo. There's this upper tangent arc and all these other cool features that we can see. In fact, if you ever look up pictures from, say, like the South Pole Observatory, when they get the sunlight during their summertime, they can see a lot of these optics because those ice crystals are so numerous around the polar regions, especially the South Pole. And of course, we have a research observation there at the South Pole. Really awesome stuff. I mentioned a prism I've mentioned a prism a couple times, and if you're wondering what a prism is, it is this object, and a friend is letting me borrow one of his, and these are really cool. You can buy these off of Amazon, and very cool scientific kind of object. It's just a glass triangle, pretty much. But what's happening is light has to shine through this, and how light passes through this object, which in this case it's glass, and in the atmosphere it's going to be ice crystals, but you have the same effect. The light is going to bend or refract as it moves through this object. And if you've still never heard of a prism before, well, I can promise you that you've probably seen this image before. This one probably rings a bell to a lot of you. The Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, one of the best albums created of all time. Well, this is just a prism, but as viewed from this angle, and all it's depicting is light shining through this prism. So I took the prism that I'm borrowing. We found a dark space in my studios in Spokane, Washington, and we had a little bit of an experiment with light. I want you to check that out right now. For this experiment, I'm going to be showing you how light goes through ice crystals, or in this case, we're actually going to use this prism that I'm borrowing. And what I have here is an equilateral triangle prism, and it's just made purely of glass, and it's going to simulate the ice crystals that are in the atmosphere, and the flashlight and the other light that I have will simulate the sun, and that will demonstrate just how light will reflect and refract off of this prism. And you're looking at this top down, so the light is actually passing through the prism at any angle that I so choose. So I'm actually going to turn off the flashlight first of all and use a laser pointer, and you probably have some of these at home. And this is a perfect demonstration. So I'm going to push this light at the prism, but at an angle, so not directly on one of its faces. So as the light hits the prism, it actually exits the prism at multiple different angles. I actually have 3 different ways, or even 4 if you notice a really smaller one that's like right here. But what's happening is, first of all, this first red light on my left, or probably your right as you are viewing it, that is actually just a pure reflection. So this face is just acting like a mirror, and the angle is exactly the same inbound and outbound. But I'm more interested in this one that's actually behind. It's at a very odd angle. So what's happening here is the light is actually entering the prism, the glass, and then it has to exit, but there's no reflection. Instead, what's happening is a process called refraction. And the angle that this refracts actually depends on the wavelength of light, because the speed of light actually slows down as it enters glass. In fact, the more dense an object is, the slower the speed of light is. So depending on the wavelength, depends on how much slower it will get. So in this case, I'm just using red light, and it happens to refract at this specific angle. But it's going to be different for all different wavelengths of light, be it red, yellow, green, blue, or even ultraviolet or infrared light. They would all actually come out of the prism at different angles, which would create rainbow colors. So now I'm going to try this with my flashlight, and this is going to be a little bit harder. It actually would be ideal if I had a white laser pointer to point at this prism, but I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try to block as much of the light as possible with this piece of paper. And if I get the angle just right, kind of look off the same angle as what was happening before, you can actually see on this side, right here, we're getting some of our rainbow colors just because the light is entering right near the edge of the prism here, but the light goes into the prism and then refracts off in this direction. So if you have kids at home and if you happen to have a white laser pointer, as long as you know what angle you have, you can probably color in the rainbow here. So here's like our red light lines. You can see some of the yellows that are like right here. Perfect. And we also have some blue, which is actually at a more extreme angle. So there's where our rainbow is coming from, is just this white light coming through the prism and creating these rainbow colors. And as I move the flashlight around, you can see that angle differing just a little bit. But let me also simulate by using the laser pointer at the same time. So if I isolate just the red light from about the same angle as the flashlight is coming in, and you can see that that red laser pointer is tracing over the red line that I just drew on the piece of paper. And that's because that wavelength of light is about the same. I'm getting a little bit of deviation just because I'm eyeballing it right here, but really cool stuff. Also notice the red line that comes out this way is actually different than the blue light that you see in that same direction. So
those angles of refraction, not reflection, but refraction, are different based on what different colors of light we have. Now, the prism that I'm using would actually simulate something more of a column of ice crystals in the atmosphere. It's actually taller than it has the face, the triangle face. But what the ice crystals will tend to look like is more like this hexagonal shape. So it has 6 sides. But what's different from my prism, because if you think about it, if you actually extend some of these lines up here, you can make a triangle out of this piece of paper. It just has six edges instead of 3. But the difference here is I was shining the light through the long end of the prism instead of on the face of the prism. So I actually could probably do these experiments the same way if I leaned my prism down this way. You would get different results though. But those different results is what we're looking for. So depending on if the light's striking the prism's edges or its faces is going to give us different results in the atmosphere, especially when we look at different types of ice crystals, and that's what's giving us all the different types of sundogs and sun halos and other types of atmosphere optics that we see in the sky.
Did you know that visible light is only about 0.0035% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which includes everything from gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet light on one side to infrared, microwaves, and radio waves on another side. So visible light, just that small fraction of what the entire electromagnetic spectrum has to offer. And yes, even a prism would still separate those different wavelengths of light, and that's how the prism separates the light to begin with, is that light is just a wave, and the wavelength, so from the crest of one wave to the crest of the next one, determines how long that wavelength is. And the longer the wavelength is, the less it gets refracted as it passes through objects like a prism, and the shorter those wavelengths are, the more it gets refracted. Now, the sun's light does the same thing, but the sun doesn't have gamma rays or X-rays or radio waves. It has quite a bit of infrared rays. It goes up to, I believe, about 2,500 nanometers in length, so well into the infrared range. As for the ultraviolet side of things, I think the shortest wavelengths that the sun produces is about 300 nanometers. So it's not strong enough, the energy level not high enough to produce those short, high energy wavelengths, but it's not so low that we're getting radio waves or broadcast waves. We just have that. In fact, pretty much the sun's light will just spread out all of that light into the spectrum, save for a couple specific wavelengths that are missing or emitted because of the sun's atmosphere or our own atmosphere, but that starts to get into the astrophysics side of things. But this is just how we get those optic features when we look at the cloud cover and we get the sun shining there. So I don't want to delve too far into the rabbit hole that is astrophysics. I go back to this picture because there's one thing I want to show you, and that's how to take a picture better than I did. First of all, you don't have to do the whole like color correction or add the filters or adjust the saturation. No, the one thing you have to do that I didn't do in this picture is you have to block out the sun's light. Cameras do not do well when there's two different like levels of light that it has to work with, and the sun is just so incredibly bright. So here's what you do. So I got my flashlight once again here. Again, bright light, and if I actually shine it right into my camera, you can tell that everything around the camera pretty much is getting blurred out. Same thing that happens with your iPhone camera or whatever camera you have at home. So the best way to get pictures of the optic features like the sun halos or the sun dogs or anything else that you might see is that if the sun is shining directly into the camera, just block out the sun. Trust me, that is going to make a world of difference. And you can either do it by literally just putting your hand in the way like I am here, or you can get creative and maybe use the environment around you. Maybe you have a telephone pole or a tree or some other object that will help to block the sun's light. Then you can get some really creative composition on those photos. So try that out, because again, shining a light directly into a camera is going to make everything else look a little bit worse. So do better than what I did on this picture. All right. As for the weather forecast moving into the weekend, keeping an eye on some severe weather in the southern states on this Friday afternoon. All these yellow boxes are severe thunderstorm watches. Thankfully, not tornado watches, and the tornado threat is not as high as it was in some previous weeks, and certainly from last month. And actually, I have a great conversation with my friend Eric, who I interviewed in last week's episode of Weather Classroom. He's a meteorologist in Alabama. And I talked to him about how he covers severe weather and tornado outbreaks. So that's a conversation you definitely do not want to miss. So make sure to look at last week's episode for that. But severe weather moving from Texas and Oklahoma all the way into Alabama as it stands right now. But on the other side of the country, and I mean way other side of the country, Alaska is actually going through quite a cold spell right now, especially in northern Alaska. And that low pressure area over Juneau, well, that's sliding the cold air into the Pacific Northwest. So here in Spokane, Washington, we got some cold weather to deal with for this weekend. Hopefully it won't be too cold where you are, but it looks like the cool spots are going to be right here in my home, Spokane, just 47 on Saturday. It looks like parts of the Midwest might get a little bit cooler as well. Hopefully not so cold that it snows in any spots that are not called the mountains in your region. So hopefully not that cold, but otherwise shouldn't be as nasty as it has been recently. But hopefully the weather holds out for you this upcoming weekend. But that is all for today's edition of Weather Classroom. Again, if you missed last week's episode, you can find it right here on YouTube. The info link is somewhere at the top of this video. As for next week, the plan is to cover climate, which I know could probably be a year's worth of subjects, but we'll try to keep it to about 15 or 20 minutes. So look for that next week. As always, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can always connect with me on any social media platform. Just search at Thomas Patrick WX pretty much everywhere, especially on Twitter. You'll find me no problem. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next week for Weather Classroom. Take care.